Hey everybody, so today I'm going to give you 4 tips for creating budgets for your grant proposals. Let's get started. Hey everybody, so this is Tiffany with Boss in a Budget. I help small and new nonprofits get up and running. I help you get your acts together. And today I want to talk about how to create great grant or program budgets for your grant proposals. So I'll be the first to say that I am not a budgeting guru or accounting or financing guru, but there are still simple tips that I can give you to help you create good budgets that actually make sense when you're submitting them to funders. And you don't have to be a guru either. You don't have to be an accounting whiz. You just have to know your program well. So I wanted to share those tips with you to help you be more confident when you're submitting your grant budgets or your proposal budgets for your programs. The first thing to keep in mind is that what's required by funders is going to differ from funder to funder. One thing you have to realize about when you're applying for grants is that every funder is different. So, what's required for a government funder, so that could be a government agency or it could be a state or another local agency, what's required by a government funder is going to be way different than what's required by like a family foundation or your community foundation. And it'll be different by what's required by a corporation or a small club that wants to give you money. So, first, you have to understand what the individual requirements are and don't make assumptions that every format is the same, all of the budget categories are going to be the same because they're going to be different. Just as a rule of thumb, and this is for any piece of a grant proposal, anything you do for a government funder is going to be way more complicated and way more detailed than anything else. So just prepare yourself mentally that when you're applying for government funding, it's going to take a lot of effort to get it right and for it to get done. Things that you submit for a foundation or corporation are probably going to be simpler, but that's not always the truth, but that's just a rule of thumb to go by. So just remember that every funder is different. They're going to ask for budgets in different formats, in different ways. They're going to have different categories for how they want you to describe the work that you're doing. They may not call it travel, they may call it something else. So that's important to keep in mind, and the reason why that matters as well is because if you do get the grant, then you need to know how they want you to submit reports for, your quarterly reports or your annual reports for how you spent the money. That's important for you to understand. How do they want you to invoice? Is it that they give you a check up front? Is it more of a reimbursement thing where they pay you every month or they pay you every quarter? All of those things matter. So research the funder and their financial requirements first, and that'll give you a good head start to knowing how to submit your budget. The second thing I want to make sure you understand is that you have to be realistic. So when you're a new nonprofit, and I'm speaking to y'all, you don't have any money probably, and so you're in your head as I'm talking like, Tiffany, I'm not going to ask for all this money if you're saying that grant, funders don't have a lot to give to new nonprofits. So I'm not going to come out the gate and ask for $100,000 if that's really what it takes. But the reality is funders can see through the BS, okay? So the budget is often the thing they look at first, and they have the budget in mind when they're looking at your narrative or what you write in the proposal. So you got to make sure that you are being realistic about the things that you're asking for and don't skirt on anything because a lot of times they know what stuff costs or they have an idea. These are people who are in this field, they probably know the work, so they want to see what it really takes. I remember one time I submitted a proposal for a program that was just getting started and they didn't feel confident really budgeting out what it would take to do an after school program. So they limited what they were asking for and said, "Oh, we're going to try to get as many kids as possible, but we're only going to touch them for an hour a week." And so the funder actually came back and said, "Well, that doesn't really make sense. If you want to make an impact for youth, you need to engage with them more than 1 hour a week. You need to really budget and write for what it's going to take to get the work done. So be realistic, really sit and think about what it costs to run your program and make sure you put that in your budget. Now, to be clear, when you submit your budget to a funder, that doesn't mean that the funder, first of all, it doesn't mean that you're asking the funder to cover all of your budget. And number two, it doesn't mean the funder will, even if you ask. So your budget is your budget. It's just a realistic representation of what it costs to run your programs and what you have to cover those expenses. The other thing is what you're asking the funder to pay for, which they may or may not. So mine is what they're going to pay for. You got to be real with yourself anyway and know what it takes so you can understand what you need to fundraise for. So just be realistic and make sure you outline the real cost. So that would be direct costs. So I'm about to give you a lesson, but you can also refer to my website where I have a glossary of terms, and I'll link that in the description box where you can look this up and you can refer to it later. But you're going to have direct costs, which are the costs that directly are attributed to the program. So you have staff that work on just that program or work a little bit on that program. If you have materials just for that program, like training materials or printing costs, all of that is associated with the program. Those are your direct costs. Then you're going to have indirect costs, and those are costs that are for the organization overall to run. So generally, you think about that as even if the program didn't exist, you still need these expenses. You still have these expenses for your organization to run. Those are more so indirect costs. So you got to be real about what it takes to directly run the program and the organization and present that real picture to the funder. So bottom line, just be realistic and really ask for what you need. The third thing, and I alluded to it in the last one in number 2, but you got to make sure that what you're asking for lines up with what you're saying in your proposal. So remember how I said that funders look at the budget first? So they're going to have that in mind when they go and they read your narrative, the things that you put in your proposal. So if in your budget you're saying, well, we need, 60% of your budget is for staff time, but it's clear in your proposal that you're not engaging with any clients a lot, or you're using more or doing more that would require materials and not staff time, they're going to look at that and say, that doesn't really match up. That doesn't really make sense. So just make sure that you have your budget and your proposal side by side. And look, this is what's going to happen. You're not going to have a budget and then write your proposal and it be perfect. You may start writing your proposal, scratch some things, say, oh, wait a minute, that's not what this is, write your budget, and then at the last minute, you may edit your proposal or edit some things that you said you were going to do. You need to go back to your budget and make sure it is an accurate reflection of everything that you said, because those are the things that are going to be caught first. And when a funder has a question about that, it questions your ability to, first of all, your credibility. Is this just a mistake? Do you know what you're doing? Or are you trying to get over? And also, it speaks to your organizational skills. Is this organization going to really be able to do this if they can't even submit the right information and submit it accurately? So just pay attention and make sure that what's in your budget is in your narrative statement for your proposal. The fourth tip that I'll give you is about your budget narrative. So if you've never heard of what a budget narrative is, it's basically an explanation of the numbers that you have in your budget. Okay, so you have a proposal narrative, which is what you're writing and explaining to the funder what you're doing and what the need is and how you're going to sustain the effort. That's your proposal narrative. But there's also a budget narrative, which can be and often is like a line by line item that explains the numbers in your budget. So the worst thing that you want is have a funder questioning what they're seeing in a budget and have no way to reconcile it or figure it out on their own. And there's not a back and forth process usually when you're submitting a proposal. So when there are a lot of questions, you run the risk of being rejected simply because it's not a coherent proposal or it's not clear. So the best thing you can do is provide as much information as possible so there are no questions when the funder or the reviewer is going through the budget. All right. So for example, if you have $20,000 in personnel costs, so that's salaries, you need to say this is for 2 FTEs that make 10,000 for 6 months of work. So they can directly line that up and go to your proposal and see that it takes 2 people to run this project. So they can see, they can line it up side by side so that it makes sense. So if you have $200 in travel cost, what is that? That is bus passes for program participants to participate in our after school programming or whatever. That is $10 a bus pass for 20 participants. I hope I got my math right. I think I did. I got it right. So the point of this is you want to make sure that there are no questions about what you're submitting. Your proposal is the best representation of who you are as a program, why you're needed, and what you're trying to do. So you don't want that back and forth of, well, what is this? And this isn't clear, so that they have any reason to reject you with all the other reasons that may be possible why they can't accept you. So just be as clear as possible, and you'll be way more successful when it comes to submitting your budgets for your grant proposals. So thank you for watching the video today. So if you're wondering how to create a grant proposal from scratch, and it's not just the budget you need help with everything. I have a workbook that can help you go through different worksheets. So at the end, you have basically all of the meat of a proposal so you can start writing. So if you want to use that workbook, I have linked it in the description box below. Feel free to check it out. Also, I have a blog on my website at www.bossonabudget.com. Feel free to look around. There's a bunch of resources, especially for small and new nonprofits who need help navigating their first couple of years. Thank you for joining, and I will see you next time.